Hello, good morning. Wait for a few people to start rolling in here. Morning. Glad to have you join us. Wait for a few more people. People just pouring in now. Terrific. Well, good morning. My name is 𝙤𝙤𝙫𝙖𝙫𝙠, and I lead Minnesota Crossroads Career Network, and we're really glad to have you join us this morning for our webinar. This is our third webinar this month. We do 3 webinars each month and on various job search topics, and hope that they're worthwhile for you and helpful in terms of your job search, as well as provide some encouragement and hope and just help along the way. We are glad to have you here this morning, and I'm just looking forward to our main speaker is Michael Hurley this morning. His presentation is on applicant tracking systems, and we get a lot of questions, as you might imagine, on how to beat the system when you're applying online. And so Michael is going to do a tremendous job of answering the majority of those questions for you, and we're going to have extensive time for Q&A, so you can ask any questions that are on your mind and address those. I want to, as I mentioned, just take this time to welcome you. I've got a little bit of additional things here, and then I've got a short video for you that I hope is encouraging for you and give you some perspective in your job search and challenges in life. And then we'll get to Michael Hurley following that. You know, our hope with Crossroads is to provide the best help and resources we can for your job search, but while also pointing to the encouragement and hope in Jesus Christ. Now, there's a perspective in the Bible that I think is so important to rely on when we're going through difficult times in life, like a job search. It's the idea of always having an attitude of gratitude, no matter what circumstances we may be going through. You know, in the book of 1 Thessalonians in the Bible, it says, "Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you." It doesn't say give thanks for all circumstances, but in all circumstances. The idea is that no matter what you're in, no matter what you find yourself in, be deliberate in maintaining a thankful heart and a grateful attitude. It's so easy for us to focus on the things that aren't going the way we want in our lives, and then take for granted or forget about all the things that are good. If we have a roof over our head, food in the refrigerator, a healthy body, family, friends, resources, a community we can turn to for support, we have more than large percentages of people in the world out there. And it's so easy to forget about all those good things when there's some things that we don't have the way we want them. Having an attitude of gratitude makes us less stressed, happier, more willing to help others, more likable, and more attractive to potential employers. I encourage you to take the time to sit down and literally list out all the good things in your life. It's so important to remind us of ourselves of those things. You know, it says count your blessings is kind of a cliche people use, and it sounds corny, or it seems like, well, that's foolish. You know, I kind of know what I have. But when you list them out, it's just a great reminder and so important. Then acknowledge that all good things come from God, and thank him for it. It makes a big difference when you put things in proper perspective. Now, let me open us in a word of prayer here, and we'll move on to the video and Michael's presentation this morning. Lord, we're grateful when we can come together, and even if it's just virtually and we don't all see each other, but I know that there's others that are in the same boat we are, and that you have it. You've got things under control that we don't often see and that we don't fully understand, but you know our circumstances even better than we understand ourselves. Father, we pray that you change our hearts and that you give us that attitude of gratitude, helping us understand that of all the good things that you've put in our lives that sometimes we just take for granted or expect to be there when there really is no good reason that they are. Thank you, Lord, for all these things. We pray that this morning is encouraging, that it is helpful and in terms of strategy and tactics for people in their job search. And we pray that it honors you in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, with that, let me share a screen here. I've got a great video by Josh Turner. He did one of these before, and this is kind of a follow-up. But Josh Turner, if you don't know, is a very successful country music singer. And I'm not a huge country music fan, but I love great stories, and he is a great has a great story. And, he faced challenges like so many of us do in life. And sometimes we let those challenges overwhelm what we're trying to accomplish or the purpose we have in life. And so he talks about that. I hope it's encouraging for you. And let me get it started.
The last time we talked was 2011, I believe. And the first thing that comes to mind is, we had our fourth child. It's another boy. I've released 2 country records, and I just recently released my very first gospel project. It's been a wild ride. There, it hasn't been just positive stuff. There's been some, really tough, challenging things that I've been through. I started singing when I was probably 4 or 5 years old. And so I've basically been singing my whole life. As I've gotten older, I've come to realize that I've been in a spiritual battle especially ever since I've decided to, pursue singing in my life. There's just a laundry list of things that I've had to endure from my neck up, everything from spinal stenosis to my vocal injury back in 1996. I've broken my jaw, I've chipped numerous teeth, gashed my chin open. I've had 2 broken noses, got hit in the head with a brick. I've had 2 concussions. The list goes on and on. And just recently, I've had sinus surgery. That's one of the many challenges that I've had to kind of fight through in order to continue to do what I love to do. There might be something you love to do, whether it's singing or something completely unrelated. Sometimes you're just gonna have to fight for it. You're gonna have to fight for, your job. You're gonna have to fight for your marriage. You're gonna have to fight for your home. You're gonna have to fight for your children or anything else in your life that has value. I think that's been the toughest struggle for me is that, I work hard towards a goal, and sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. So I just have to kind of commit that to prayer on a daily basis. A lot of times the success that we have in our mind is it kind of, once you actually achieve it, if you ever do achieve it, a lot of times it just leaves you flat and it leaves you empty, and it doesn't fill that void that you're trying to fill. And the only way you can fill that void is with Jesus. And I've learned that firsthand. You've heard people say whenever they take their first trip to Israel, they talk about how it's a life-changing trip. Being able to go over there and see these places with my own eyes, just thinking about how it related to me in my life today and how the Lord He's still living and He's still speaking to us. When I was standing on the shore of the Sea of Galilee and just thinking about, when He called the 2 disciples to throw down their nets and follow Him, Jesus was standing there on the shore, and they audibly heard His voice, and He told them, hey, stop what you're doing. I'm calling you to something bigger and something better. And they did it. I started thinking about the time that He actually spoke to me about my future at that crossroads of like, do I stay here or do I chase this dream, and do I make the sacrifice to move to Nashville? And so He spoke to me and basically said, I'll get you there. All you have to do is trust me. He called me spiritually to my future and to be a fisher of men. And so not only have I made country music, but I've said from the day I got my record deal that this is not just about me. I want to be able to have a platform where I can make a positive impact in people's lives. When I was standing there on the Sea of Galilee, thinking like, I can relate to those disciples. They could have easily just stayed in that boat. They would have never reached the people that they reached. They never would have made the difference that they made of, and we wouldn't be sitting here talking about them today. And same with me. I could have easily just ignored what He said and tried to make it on my own, or even just stay there in my hometown. But I never would have reached the people that I've reached. God knew what potential I had. He knew that He had given me a talent and I was supposed to use it. And I chose to do that. I chose to use it instead of burying it or, just hanging on to it. I'm definitely very thankful for what I get to do. Each and every night, I want to make sure that I'm not squandering my opportunity, no matter how rough my day was or how crappy I'm feeling. I want to make sure I go out there and put a smile on my face and God is good. If you want to find out how to live second, go to iamsecond.com/live-second.
This is the map.
Sorry, a bit of a diversion there at the end. I think so many times, as I said, we think that if we're doing the right things, that life is going to be smooth and without challenges. And, even if you're doing absolutely the right things, we're likely to face a lot of challenges in life, and getting through those periods of time, it depends on where do you turn to, what do you rely on. And Josh, I think, pointed that out pretty clearly. Next, I am really glad to be able to introduce Michael Hurley. Michael has been a friend. We've worked together many, many years ago, but he has a tremendous background in recruiting, both as from an agency perspective and with as a corporate recruiter for great companies, including General Mills. Currently, he's a principal recruiter at Best Buy, has been there now for the past several years. And he gets it in terms of what happens on the receiving end of your job applications. He's worked with multiple applicant tracking systems over the years, understands how they work, and what, certainly he can talk about how he uses them and what happens to your resume when it arrives there, and help you figure out how to work through them most effectively. I have a great deal of respect for Michael, and he's been helping with Crossroads now for, God, what is it, 14 years? Something like that.
Is it that long?
Yeah,
Wow.
We're old.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really grateful to have him here this morning and share with you. He's got the next hour. He's going to leave extensive time for Q&A, but you can use the chat box to ask any questions that are on your mind at all about the application process and the systems, and or anything else regarding applying to companies. Michael, I'll leave it to you. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Harry. And I should start by saying, I hope that the slides will work fine this morning. We were having a little bit of a issue with them to begin with, but we should be good. So again, appreciate Harry's introduction. Just a quick introduction again about my background is basically been since the late 80s focused on recruiting. So corporate recruiting, consulting within multiple companies, and then as an agency or third party recruiter over those years. So, and all here in the Twin Cities, but have reached out to a number of clients across the country. So quite a bit of variety of experience as it relates to what we're talking about today, which is the ATS that companies use. And every company will use a different tool, if you will. So we'll get into that a little bit later, but first wanted to share my screen here. We'll share the one that I need to share. Hold, please. Okay. Everybody see that, I hope?
Seeing the whole app, but it works. You've got primarily the individual slide up there.
All right, are we seeing it now?
It works the way it is. Go ahead.
Gotcha. Sorry about that, folks. So the next slide here that talks about is the common things we hear about an ATS. And I would say the first one that most of you may have even mentioned in conversation is the black hole. And I would say to some extent from the outside, it probably does seem that way. You apply, put your resume in there, and never a word is spoken or email sent after that. I would say, in essence, probably not quite as accurate or bad as it sounds. The advent, obviously, of an ATS is that a lot of people can apply. And you typically should have some kind of communication coming back to you, whether it be just we received the application, or we will pursue other candidates, or you're still in consideration. So a number of communications have come out, but the black hole piece is, I would say, a little bit of a misnomer. The second things that we typically see, and you'll see on the slide, there is how can I beat an ATS, or how can I bypass the ATS? And I would say to those, you really can't beat or bypass the ATS. Almost any company has to.
Michael, I'm sorry, we're seeing a different slide. I think you're on the first one. We're seeing the second one, I believe. There. Oh,
How's that?
yeah, that's the one you were talking about.
Sorry about that. I'm looking at two screens here too, trying to make sure I'm on the right screen for everybody. So this is the one that we were talking about. So how can I beat the ATS? How do I bypass the ATS? And we'll talk about this later, but there really isn't a way necessarily to beat them or bypass them. They're firmly implanted in most companies. And in order to be considered at all, you do have to apply and go through the full process. The other comment that people see is no one sees my resume, or in this case, 70% of resumes in the ATS are never seen by a human. And that last comment is somewhat true if you think about it from the standpoint of any given position or people apply to. We might end up, let's say at Best Buy, have 200 applicants for a position. Well, not all those 200 that apply are going to be qualified. So that basically reduces the number of people that I as a recruiter would see. So I might literally see 100 resumes if they are qualified, and I will go through those, and our team does go through many, many, many resumes. So 70% of the resumes never reviewed by a human. There's some truth to that, but there's a lot more human eyes on resumes than I think people really believe. Again, because if we have 100 applicants, excuse me, half of those are qualified, we're going to review 50. We're not going to necessarily interview those 50. We're going to go through and review those resumes, see who's the most qualified, who fits what the hiring leaders are looking for, or certainly obviously what the recruiter is looking for, and we're going to pursue conversations with those folks. So a couple things in terms of what you might not know. People are basically the deciders, again, like I mentioned, of which candidates will be considered. The unless part of this slide is, and I hinted at it, unless you're not qualified for the role, and not qualified meaning the position is posted, it has minimum or basic requirements listed, there's preferred qualifications listed. If specific to the basic or the minimum qualifications or requirements that are listed are not met when you apply, then no one will see your resume unless we go to, if you will, kind of the next stage of recruiting, where we will look at some of the people that were declined automatically by the system to see if someone was missed. Someone may have answered the questions that were posed to them incorrectly in the system and were turned down. So we do go through those resumes that were initially declined fairly often, especially when we have a very difficult position to fill. So again, people really are behind the scenes in these in any given ATS. So just wanted to make sure that that's really clear. The functionality is hugely varied between the software itself, the actual product, the ATS, and how the companies use them. As you can imagine, there's all kinds of different, I'll show a slide of this in a minute here, all kinds of different ATS in the market. Just everybody's coming up with a new one, it seems like every couple months. The company's use of them will vary greatly. So as Harry mentioned early on, I've been with Best Buy for 7 years. We've had 2 different ATS scenarios that we've used. While I was at General Mills, we had a different one. I was at Target, we had a different one. I was with Robert Half, a large, obviously international agency. We had a different one there. So you can't really figure out what an ATS is going to do because you don't really know which one they're using. And they all use it very differently. Some will use full functionality, everything that the system is capable of, the company will implement. And in some cases, with some very large companies that I've been a part of or a consultant with, they might use 30, 40, 50% of the functionality. It just depends on how they set it up. So it's difficult to say, oh, this is how these systems work, and therefore this is how I should go about, in this case, as a candidate applying to it. And the last thing on this slide, I would say, is there is a fairly high percentage of job applications that are left incomplete. I would say largely because people make the choice to not complete the application because, as I mentioned previously, if a company is using a full functionality of a particular application process, they can be long, they can be tedious, they can be repetitive. But as I've said down the road here, you can only control what you can control. So the hard part about these job applications that are left incomplete in the system is we can see that they're incomplete. Then again, it's a decision based on a person's decision. Do we go look at those individuals that are sitting in the system that show as incomplete? And incomplete could be for a variety of things. They didn't attach their resume, they didn't complete some of the sections that the application is looking for. And I would say in most cases, based on a high number of candidates applying, we probably won't go back to those individuals that have an incomplete application. So therefore, they don't get considered. So again, you have to take a big picture look at a lot of this to say there's a lot of nuances, as you can see from what I've already said, a lot of different scenarios that come up with an ATS and how it's used and how your resume may have be seen or not seen. So real quickly, who is using an ATS? So as you can see on the slide, I won't drain it, but almost every Fortune 500 company used an ATS. This is from JobScan in terms of the data, but the data around this is pretty consistent across the board. And even 35% of small companies use some form of an ATS, and it could be homegrown, it could be an Excel spreadsheet, it could be a SQL database, something fairly simple. But they still use them to track who's applying, who they're interviewing, all kinds of candidate information. So you go back to, can't really get around an ATS because they're pretty much everywhere, and 75% of the recruiters in the market use some form of an applicant tracking system as well. This would be a quick look, as I mentioned, the top applicant tracking systems, and this will change to some extent, and depending on what you pull up in terms of just even some research, you might find some different percentages here, but overall, Workday is very large. Taleo is large. Connexa Brass Ring is what Best Buy uses, and we moved from Taleo to Connexa Brass Ring probably 3-4 years ago. And we do actually now use Workday as well, but we don't use the applicant tracking system part of it. So again, as I mentioned, there's a lot of nuances inside a company in terms of how we use the systems and what they use. And as you can see here, there's some homegrown, there's some that are unknown. So again, a lot of variation in terms of how resumes and applications come in and how they're processed, how they're reviewed. So why do companies use an ATS? Well, I think one of the early reasons was as soon as we could start applying online, we're inundated with applicants, as you can imagine. even in your own job search, I would venture a guess that people are applying to quite a few jobs, more certainly than they would have without the opportunity to apply online. So basically, it's an opportunity for us to choose a product, an ATS, that will help us improve the hiring process. That would be primarily for the company, but it also helps, I would say, from an applicant standpoint. Having been in, side note, I've been in a couple of the companies that I've mentioned where we aren't using the full functionality of the ATS. And what ends up happening is people do fall through the cracks then. If you aren't using the full functionality, if their processes aren't honed really well in terms of step by step by step by step, what happens to a candidate when they come in the door, so to speak, there's a lot of people that can fall through the cracks, as I mentioned. So the idea is to use the full functionality of it, to look to see how you can improve it, to look to see how the candidate experience has been based on your application process. So big picture, we need the ATS to do reporting. So reporting, internal reporting for us could be how many people have applied. Well, backing up, when is the position posted? How long is it going to be posted for? How many people have applied? Of those people that have applied, how many people are qualified? How many people basically were declined before they even got to be able to be viewed by a recruiter and are sitting in a different bucket, if you will. Reporting on how long the position's been open. So all kinds of things we can and do report on based on the ATS that we're using. Obviously, if you have any kind of government contracts, you're going to have government compliance reporting coming out of that ATS. Customized screening, I would say, is a big part, certainly for myself and the teams that I'm on in talent acquisition, is when we set up a position in the system, we, as an example, Best Buy, we have basic requirements or basic qualifications listed. So if those are typically quantifiable, saying 5 or more years or 6 or more years or 2 or more years of experience, we're going to have a question that's attached to the application that you as an applicant would need to complete. So if the position says we need 2 or more years of search engine optimization SEO experience, we're going to have a question that says, how many years experience do you have with search engine optimization SEO experience? And if you say 2 or more, 3 or more, 4 or more, good, you meet qualifications, then I would see you as the recruiter. If you said anything less than 2, so 1 and less than 2 or 6 months and less than 1 year, which is how they're all divided up, you would likely be declined by the system based on not meeting the minimum qualifications. And those questions, this is getting kind of complicated, but those questions are given point totals. So if you apply as a candidate and you answer all those qualifying questions in a way that says that you are fully qualified, you're going to get the full point total. It's going to be listed in my dashboard for, in this case, connects the brass ring. I'm going to be able to see the score that you listed. I'm going to be able to see a lot of other pieces of information, but specific to customized screening, we can set those screening questions up to match any given job posting. And other systems will do that completely differently. Some will be set up, we'll see color codes depending on how you answered questions or depending on how your application matches. Some will give percentages, and some, as ours do, give you basically a number. And again, in some cases, they don't use the scoring screening functionality at all. They will look at pretty much every application that comes in. So the whole idea here, again, is with these customized screening is, as it says next, reduce the volume of applicants that are reviewed. So of late, we've had a lot of our recruiters are reviewing anywhere from 100 to 200 actual resumes that have applied and are qualified. typically lower level positions, but nonetheless, it's a lot of resumes to review. And again, people are reviewing those resumes. And obviously from a system perspective, applicant information and communication. So when you apply, we see that you apply, we see when you applied, we see when you filled out and how you filled out those questions that I mentioned. And then as you move forward, if you meet qualifications, the system will tell us that. If then I review your application, I click the next button that says reviewed external. If I want to interview, then I go to another status of schedule talent acquisition screen. So there's all these steps and stages that are documented in there. And then as soon as we start sending you communication, it notifies us that this communication has been sent based on what we selected. So there's a lot of that keeps you as an applicant, hopefully, in a good place so we don't miscommunicate with you or not see you in the application in the position that you've applied to. And then what we also use it for is it builds a talent pipeline. So obviously an ATS is a large database of people who've applied to, in this case, that's fine. If we fill similar positions as we do often, whether it be in finance or accounting or data science or software engineering, obviously we don't hire everybody in the first go round of the position that they may have applied to and been qualified for. But we will go back and look at previous roles that have been filled and closed, but there's candidates in those positions that we may want to contact and reach out to and say, hey, we have a new position. You had applied previously for this role. This is a similar role. Would you be interested? And we can do that in an automated fashion as well through the ATS. So we do that. So hopefully that's a lot of information on why companies use an ATS, but I hope hopefully that helps. A couple things, but what you don't need to know is, I think you've probably been able to figure that out, is how they all work. The assessments that they use, the companies use within an ATS vary greatly. So, and the functionality, as I mentioned, vary greatly. So you can't figure out how they all work. And obviously we don't even know how they all work. It takes us a long time to transition from one product to another, which I've done several times because there's so many different nuances in those systems. The other thing that some people we hear often about is, oh, the keyword search knocked me out. It's like, well, some do keyword searches. I would say a lot don't. An equal amount that don't use a keyword search within their applicant tracking system. The side note on that is that the keywords in any given application or job description that you want to apply to should be represented in some way, shape, or form on your resume. Because even as a recruiter, if I'm looking for, again, just to use the SEO or search engine optimization qualification, I'm going to look for that on your resume. If it's not on your resume, I'm going to be hard pressed to say I should talk to you. So you do need to make sure that the keywords that are in the qualifications, at least, or key responsibilities, are on your resume and represented. And the other thing that, again, you really won't know, and most systems aren't using it heavily at this point, is using artificial intelligence. That is certainly growing. It's going to continue to grow to where there's all kinds of different ways that they can use AI to assess the match, if you will, of an applicant who's applied to a given position. But even you think of like the likes of Amazon, for instance. I have a friend that has been in the talent acquisition area there for some time, and they don't use, you would think they would based on being Amazon, but they don't use AI. So even a lot of the large companies don't use that at this point. I would say, as most of my co-workers and friends in the recruiting industry that I talked to about this particular topic said, yeah, we don't use that. And we'll see how it goes. We'll see if we decide to use it or not. So I wouldn't get too worried about that. Next slide is what you do need to know. And these are some seemingly, I would say, pretty obvious things, if you will. So the job and the company. The second part of that, the company, I would say, you do want to research the company, and hopefully you've researched the company long before you decide to apply and decided that it was a company you're interested in. And knowing about the company tends to be more important when you actually do get that initial interview, probably with talent acquisition and human resources. The job itself, though, you really want to know the job that you're applying to. And this goes back to what I just mentioned a minute ago, is as you look at a job, do you have that experience? If so, is that experience listed on your resume? Because if it's not, that's where, if there's some kind of keyword search, or if there's eyes on the resume that are looking for some of those specific keywords or experience, you will get declined if they're not on there. So know the job that you're applying to, know that if you're qualified for it, and then decide whether you want to apply. The other thing would be, basically, as you think about an ATS, how to build a relatively foolproof resume for any ATS. And there's several things to consider there. I guess the first is what I talked about, is keywords. Make sure that your qualifications match what that job posting says. A couple of the other items I would say that are important is, from a formatting perspective, there's all kinds of formats for resumes out there, but in this case, if you're applying to an ATS, every ATS system is more or less comfortable with certain formats. So what you want to do is make it as easy for the ATS to take in that resume as possible, which means, as much as possible, leave out graphs, tables, just too much formatting. You want to keep it very basic. And from the type of document, Word or PDF is fine, either one. But again, as you look at the resume and you get a lot of lines, a lot of formatting, a lot of boxes, and fancy different fonts, I would leave those out, because depending on how the system is set up and what it can take in, you could have a beautiful resume that turns into a big pile of text in the system, which makes it harder for us to read. So make sure that your format is set up as clean as possible. And some of the Calibri, Arial, Times New Roman are probably some of the best fonts to use for your resumes to, again, make it fairly clean coming through an ATS. The other note I would say is do a reverse chronological resume. So your most recent work experience first. That is always going to be your best bet in terms of the resume that you send in. And I would definitely say, and this is a little bit more of a personal opinion, but I think it's pretty true with most of my recruiter friends, is don't use the functional resume in general, but in applying as well. Because if you can think of a functional resume, they're very broadly stated. They highlight skills in a big picture way, not necessarily specific to a role. So I would suggest that is something that you consider when you're looking at setting up your resume to then apply. The other note I would say is make sure, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people don't complete the application. If you're interested in the company and the job itself that you're applying to looks really interesting to you, you can control what you can control. In this case, you can fully complete the application process. And yes, I would agree. Some of them are repetitive. Some of them are having you add your resume, then write, to some extent, the rest of your resume in multiple boxes. So yeah, it's time consuming, but it is a choice. Again, if it's a company that you're very interested in and you're qualified for, you kind of have to just go through the process. And then it's the obvious, which seem to be obvious. If you don't meet qualifications, think before you apply. The hard part with this is if people are in transition and they are trying to make a move from one space they've been in a role to a different space or a different discipline, applying to roles in that case, in order to match the qualifications and have the keywords and experience that are qualified or that are being asked in the qualifications, is difficult. So that should give you some pause about whether you should apply, because if you're applying to positions that, again, that you're not qualified for, you don't have either the years of experience or the specific experience, you're going to get declined and you're going to get frustrated. So there's ways around that, so to speak, which I'll talk about in a minute briefly, but a lot of that gets to networking. So I finished this slide, like, what do you need to know when you're looking at applying to an ATS? And you can control what you control. And hopefully I've listed out a number of those things. But that's, I would say, I would highlight that. Think of it that way. I can't control what system is being used. I can't control how they're using a system. I can't control if they're using a system. Or even for that matter, what qualifications they list on their job postings. But you can't control how you go about it, how you research, how you prepare. And finally, specific to that, what you can control is preparation. So as I mentioned, pre-ATS, so pre-applying, do your homework, review the company, and very specifically review those jobs that you're interested in and see how well your resume, current resume, or one that you might tailor to this matches with that role or roles that you want to apply to. The next part I would say would be networking. In particular, but it doesn't matter if you're qualified or not, but in particular, if you're in transition, you want to network prior to applying as much as possible to see if you can find someone in the company that may be able to push your resume to someone like myself. I get those quite often from all over the company. We're obviously a very large company. I'd say, hey, Michael, I think you work in this area. Would you mind taking a look at this person's resume? I think they'd be a great fit for the company. I'll leave it to you in terms of which specific area they might fit in, but let me know how it goes. We get those a lot. And if it's a person whose resume, let's say, doesn't really speak loudly to what they're saying they want, we'll oftentimes get them on the phone and talk to them about their resume. So again, you go back to the very beginning, people are involved in a lot of these conversations, and especially when it gets to networking. And then if you are qualified, but you know there's probably a lot of competition, let's say, for any given role that you're applying to, networking in advance of applying to an ATS should, and typically does, help you get noticed, recognized, reviewed, and hopefully have conversations with recruiters that you maybe wouldn't otherwise have. The book that I noted there, and I know Crossroads has had Nathan Perez on talking about the 20-minute networking meeting, is a great resource, and a lot of what it does is tell you what not to do in a networking meeting. So that's always good to know as well. Then the part when I lead and facilitate our Crossroads job search training classes, if you will, a lot of what I do in the middle of those classes and near the end is mock interviewing. So we have people set up their STAR stories: situation, task, action, result. You can look it up. It's on a lot of places on the internet. It's an interview technique and how to basically set up your interview questions. But we go through and do a lot of mock interviewing, because you can do all of the worrying and applying that you want in advance through an ATS. But if you get asked to an interview and you're not prepared to tell your story, then all of that pre-work is for naught. So to me, as a recruiter who interviews people every day, and I have for 20 years, and I sit with directors and vice presidents and C-level folks and hiring managers in many spaces, not just engineering, data science, but finance, accounting, marketing, and sales. The biggest differentiator between one candidate getting hired and another, if assuming they have the same experience, let's say, is their ability to tell their story and to tell it well. So this is where I see people typically balk almost all the time. Like, who wants to do role plays? Who wants to do mock interviewing? Well, everybody should. It's not, it will make your journey much more successful. Let's just say that. Obviously, we have resources at mincrossroads.com and the national site crossroadscareer.org as well for you. And I would certainly encourage you to sign up for those. And then from a devotional perspective, Help Wanted, Devotions for Job Seekers. Aaron Vasco has written that book, and I know Harry has one that he'll highlight as well. So a couple of these devotionals that we've seen over the years are just awesome for just encouragement in the transition, encouragement in the journey. That I think for me and a lot of the Crossroads, I think that only having a relationship with Christ and looking at it from that perspective will get you through in a positive way. So I hope this has helped. I think I'll let Harry open it up for questions at this point.
Thanks, Michael. Somebody's asking just in general, will this presentation be available to participants? Absolutely. And I'll describe that later, but we do have a YouTube channel and all of our webinars go on to our YouTube channel. So you'll be able to watch this and any other presentations that we do there as well. But please use this time to ask any questions about the application process, about how interviewing tips, how the networking has worked. I think Michael's done an incredibly good job in terms of describing a lot of that already, but you hear a lot that so many jobs get filled through some form of networking. And I appreciated Michael kind of sharing what happens on the inside of an organization to be able to get that accomplished. Somebody's asking, Jean's asking, can you restate the suggested fonts again for resumes for the ATS systems?
Oh, sure. Yeah, there's not a magical one, but I would say Times New Roman is one that's been around for a long time. Calibri, CALIBRI is one, and then Arial is another. I'd say those three, even in our system and our emails, for instance. I mean, our system typically pops it up in Arial or Calibri, I believe. So. One thing, Harry, could I jump in with one thing that I forgot to mention?
Yeah.
And it's specific to why some people decide not to apply. I guess so. It's a little different than the ATS piece, but it's people say, well, you hear that 70% of positions are filled and they're not even posted. It's like, well, I'm not so sure I've ever agreed with that. And part of the reason is there's so much that goes into with medium-sized companies, let's say 500 to larger and large companies like that Best Buy's Targets. There's the budget there. The position has to be approved. It has to be justified. There has to be budget for it. There has to be consideration of what this team looks like, what the position is going to do, and again, from a compliance perspective, a reporting perspective, we can't just be hiring people. Oh, this manager wants to hire that person. This manager wants to hire that person. So if those positions are filled without being posted, and Harry, you could comment on this, I would say they're probably at very small companies that don't have the systems and the processes or that they need to follow. It's a small company, privately held. They can add to the budget however they want and move forward. So I always like to address that one as well.
Yeah, and my perspective just is, I agree that most jobs probably gets posted at some point, but many of them, there's already a candidate in mind by the time it does get posted. And certainly they're still willing to consider someone that, might pop up that's a superstar that's better for the job. So it's not that there's no chance anymore for somebody else to get the job, but right. Often it is a case of it's already posted. And, it's one thing I tell people a lot is, once a job's posted online, everyone and their brother knows about it. It's public information. Everybody can find it easily, right? And so that's why it's so important many times to target companies you're interested in, even when they don't have something posted, just to start building relationships and being prepared for when something appropriate does come up.
Yeah, and to add on to that real quickly too, Target years ago when I was there, they filled 40% of their positions through employee referrals, and they had a very robust employee referral program.
Absolutely, yeah.
But 40% is a lot. But you've hired good people, they know good people, so that goes back to the whole networking piece, to network in advance.
Absolutely. A quick story on that is, and this was a number of years ago now, but Michael and I both know Dave Sparkman. He used to be at United Health Group, and he facilitated classes for Crossroads with us as well. And there was somebody in one of his groups that had applied for a position at United Health Group that she felt she was qualified for, but they had the questionnaire process, as you described early in your presentation, of, do you have at least 2 years of this experience and 5 years of that experience, et cetera. And then they provided a score. So she applied, and Dave took her resume also to help her out, took her resume to the recruiter that was working on that position. And he looked her up and he said, yes, she applied, but she got an 86% score. And I've got 16 candidates that scored 100%. I can't really present someone to the hiring manager that, isn't as well qualified as other applicants. I've got so many other applicants that we have to winnow down as well. And so Dave said, fine. And he went directly to the hiring manager instead and said, I know you have other applicants that appear more qualified, but I know this person and know that she would be a really good culture fit for the organization. And she's very competent. I just, can you just at least take a look at her? Well, the hiring manager did bring her in and she did get the job. And it was, even though the applicant tracking system pointed to a number of different people and she didn't have a chance through that system. So again, just emphasizing the importance of the networking and finding somebody to kind of be a champion for you or help get you to the right person.
Definitely.
We do have a few other questions in here. One person just he asks, where can we find direction for proper formatting? One thing I recommend people to do, and maybe you have some other ideas on this, Michael, but if you Google, depending on what you are, say you're an accountant, and just Google accounting resumes and then go to the images section of your search results, you'll see literally thousands of accounting resumes. And as you look at several of them, you'll find examples that work for you and others that don't. Now, just because they're online doesn't mean it's a good resume. So you have to, still discern. But what other resources have you used that you can recommend for people?
I would say that, I hate to say it, but it's like everything's on the internet.
Yeah.
So literally, there's some very good articles in JobScan, specifically JobScan, calling that out.
Somebody else was asking about that, right?
Has some good information. Well, JobScan is as far as I use it, it's just a site that comments on, in this case, ATS. They'll have articles and if you will, webinars online about multiple topics. But one of them was specifically, if you basically type in, how do I best prepare to apply to an ATS, or what is important in applying to an ATS, or what resumes work for an ATS. Any of those scenarios will get you some very good information, and will, in essence, it'll run down just what I did for you earlier, is all the different things that would be key in applying to an ATS, specific to, again, your resume, the formatting, the font, the type of resume, again, reverse chronological, not functional. So, yeah, and then the keyword piece as well. That's
the other thing and it's jobscan.co, not .com. It's just .co, and it's a great resource. One of the other things they have available on there is to be able to cut and paste your resume in one box and the job description in another box, and it will give you a rough estimate of does the resume address the job description pretty well. It'll give you a percentage, and you don't want to shoot for 100% necessarily, but maybe 65, 70%. But and I wouldn't take that as the end all, but it's a great resource to be able to see, are you targeting your resume effectively for that job search. One of the other questions here is if the ATS system doesn't have a field to add a cover letter, should you include it in the same place with the resume? That brings up the whole question of cover letters that we discuss a lot. So I'll let you address it.
I would say yes to the question of, can I add it to the document that I download that would be my resume? I don't see it very often. I see it and there's 25, 30 recruiters at Best Buy. They'd probably all say this. We rarely see a cover letter anyway, because we don't require it. And generally speaking, we wouldn't look at it unless the resume is exactly what we need. There is a tab in KBR and connects to brass ring where you can put a cover letter, but the first tab we're going to go to is resume. But I have seen some people have a short is the key word there, a short cover letter on top of the document that then scrolls down to their resume. So some people have done that. You don't have to in our system, but they've just set it up that way. So I would say if they're not asking for a cover letter, excuse me, I probably wouldn't even worry about it, honestly, because most cover letters are not read. And I know Harry could comment on this too. I mean, even if I go way back pre-ATS, dating myself here, we used to get our administrative assistant would bring in all the actual hard copy resumes, and the resumes would be on top and the cover letters would be on the bottom. And unless we looked at the resume and went, oh, this person fits based on what we know of the job, we're not going to turn to the next page and look at the cover letter. And in part because the cover letters, either they're too long and we don't have time to read them, or they're very standard. So if you're going to do a cover letter, I would say make it short, maybe 2 to 3 short 2 to 3 sentence paragraphs, very specific, very simple. And there's a lot of stuff out there in the obviously in the internet about that too, but that's a long-winded answer to the question.
I agree. I think, and I think you'd agree with this, it's your time and effort is much better served by customizing your resume for the job than it is to craft a cover letter. And that's going to be much more effective for you than taking the time on a cover letter. Now that said,
if I could comment on the resume real quickly, and Harry, I think you chime in with this. Specific to the resume and setting it up, I know Crossroads, we do one-on-one coaching for people, so you can sign up for that one-on-one coaching and talk through the resume with folks that know that. But I have a lot of people that will say, okay, Michael, I'll give you my resume, but 10 people have looked at it and I get 10 different opinions. I said, well, maybe you shouldn't have given it to 10 people. What I suggest is that you try to get your resume, if you're having people look at it, to someone like myself in talent acquisition, human resources, a recruiter that looks at them all the time and gets feedback from hiring leaders about this resume looks good, or this is an awful resume. So we're getting feedback from the hiring leaders, and we live resumes. The other thing would be a hiring leader who does a lot of hiring, who reviews resumes. Those two sources, and you don't have to make a lot, are probably your best bets in terms of how does my resume look? Everybody's going to have a comment on a document that somebody's written that will edit, but the actual day-to-day experience, if you will, behind the scenes, where we look at them all day, we present them to leaders, we present them to teams, they review them, they give us feedback. That's the kind of feedback you want for your resume.
I couldn't agree more. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there that give resume advice, that give bad advice, and most of the time it's because it's outdated. They've been in HR 15 years ago, and what was common best practices then is no longer true, and things have changed, and so there's still old advice being given to people, and so people that are looking at resumes every day, all day, like recruiters, are generally going to agree on things and give solid advice. So weigh that advice more than you might get from somebody else. Somebody asks, you mentioned that functional resumes as opposed to chronological resumes are not ideal. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yes, and Harry, you could certainly chime in too, but I would say the first thing that comes to mind is I'm literally pitching a functional resume. A lot of times they'll highlight leadership skills, project management skills, organizational skills. So again, very broadly stated. Sometimes they have specific things from your experience under some of those headings. But the hard part for a hiring leader or a recruiter is you have these broad buckets of skills listed, and then down below, sometimes, and you should have at least company title and years at this company. Boom, 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 boom. it's like playing a word game where you've got one side, there's a definition, and the other side is a whole bunch of words, and you're supposed to try and match all those. It's really hard for the recruiter or manager to take a look at a functional resume and go, well, they listed that they have leadership of direct reports here, but I don't know where it landed in their actual work experience. Was it 10 years ago, or was it 2 years ago? Or they have this great skill set in accounting or finance, but I don't really know, again, based on their list of employers that they've been a part of, where that lands. So you don't want them to try and play a matching game. And that's what a functional resume typically causes us to do. It's like, we have to kind of guess to say, well, I think it looks in general close enough to where we might talk to them. We have enough resumes so we don't have to have any of those questions. So that's one challenge with them. The other is typically, not always the case, but there's two things that I've seen. People that are in job transition that want to go from one career, if you will, to a different career, different discipline, will oftentimes put together a functional resume because they want to call out key skills, which I get. But that's one thing that we typically see. The other is if people have had a lot of job moves, they don't want to highlight the chronological piece, they want to highlight the skills. So we're aware of those options, but I would just say, I think you're much better served with the amount of applications, resumes that we review, how managers review them, to go with a reverse chronological resume.
I think what a lot of times people forget is that they'd like recruiters and hiring managers to think outside the box and think creatively about, their resume and their background for a particular job. But the reality is you're getting a lot of resumes on the receiving end, and there's always going to be some people that match up very, very well. And as long as people are sending in resumes, all they're being judged on is the data of what's on their resume. That there's nothing about you really don't learn anything about their personality or culture fit at that point. You're just looking at backgrounds. And so even though you might want them to think outside the box, but they have 5 people that have exactly the kind of background that they'd like to see from the most current position. And then you have somebody that's coming from another kind of a background or, outside the box. It's not hard to figure out who they're going to interview and who they're not. And so that doesn't mean you can't pursue that job, but it's got to be through some form of networking rather than just relying on your resume to fill that gap.
Exactly. That's where the functional resume would come in. And here you made the example already, that Dave looked at a resume that wasn't quite the right fit, presented it and spoke to it. So that's where, again, the networking comes in. So I just noticed one quick thing in the chat, and it had to do with, do I have to call out, I think it was, here you could correct me, but do I have to call out the specific number of people that I might have had as for direct reports? Like, no, but I typically see that. So led a group, an organization of 60 or more people, or had consistently 5 to 10 direct reports in the software engineering space. That's fine. But I would say it isn't a requirement, but if you have had direct report leadership, you do want to call that out.
Yeah, definitely. One of the questions, do recruiters only look at the information put in the ATS, or do they look at the resume as well? And is it okay to put a few key points in the system and then have more detail on the resume?
First and foremost, we look at a resume. I would say that's, yeah. If there's, it's a little bit complicated, but if there's a lot of applicants that are qualified, so they've come through and say basically meets qualifications or whatever the terminology is for the ATS, there's different ways that we would look at the that large group. And Harry mentioned it. Sometimes the systems, and I think UHG had it, where you 100% match based on whoever the system is set up to look at that application, and typically looking at that resume. And then it goes down from there, and there's a 30% match. So we're going to look at those resumes that match the best first. And anything else in the system is kind of it should be a mirror to what is on your resume. So you add your resume and then you go in and you fill out the boxes like worked here, from here to here, in this position, in a brief description. And you can pull that from your resume and put it in. Some systems ask for that, some don't. But again, big picture, we would always typically look at the resume first. So there really isn't a space necessarily to where something additional could be mentioned or noted, except maybe the cover letter. And again, I probably 99% of the time, I don't even get a cover letter. So does that help?
I think so. Laura says, I have used sites like JobScan to optimize my resume, and in some cases, it doesn't see some of the words that are on my resume. Why is this? I don't know if you have some thoughts on that. I have a couple of ideas.
I don't. I guess my comment is what I like to, I mean, JobScan is, and there's other tools like that. In my classes that I facilitate, I really push individuals to do the resume themselves, because it's your work experience that you're detailing out in your resume. You're the one that knows it the best. And you're the only one that can look at multiple different descriptions and say, oh, here's how my experience fits with that. So is that represented on my resume? So you can have it system generated, but I honestly hate to say this, but I think sometimes candidates get lazy with that and they want a system to do it for them. And what that does is it takes out, I think, some of the ownership and ability to speak to it really clearly when you get into an interview. So that's my take on it, as I've had, I don't know, 30 some groups that I've facilitated, but thoughts that you might have, Harry.
Yeah, and I think in this case, she's asking about, she's putting in her resume as opposed, comparing it to the job description, and it's not seeing the match. Mm-hmm. I'm not exactly sure what's going on there, but my guess is that the JobScan does use some intelligence in it. Mm-hmm. And so if a requirement on the job description is, near the top of the list as a primary requirement, but the corresponding keyword in your resume is buried somewhere as a sixth bullet point in the list of 7, mm-hmm. it may be telling you that it's not evident enough in your resume to really stand out as having that matching experience.
And I have seen experiences, actually, where some of those systems will, and what we like to see typically is, if we're looking for very specific skills, we like to see that early on in the resume, where mm-hmm. it'd be in a very brief summary and a very brief highlight of skills, or in that first role. So some systems will highlight that, like, yes, it showed up here 5 times in the first paragraph or something like that. Mm-hmm. If, like Harry said, if it's buried down at the bottom, you might want to, and it's a key skill, you may want to get it to the top.
Along with that, one technique I've seen that, and you can comment on this in terms of what it's like on the receiving end, but I think that's effective, is if you look at the requirements on the job description, you can boldface those words on the resume, even if it's just 1 or 2 words in the middle of a line, because as a recruiter or hiring manager is looking at the resume, typically they don't read the resume top to bottom. They're just kind of scanning up and down and picking out key information. But their eyes are going to be attracted to those bold-faced words. And so going down the list and bold-facing the key requirements on your resume, I think, can be an effective technique to make sure they get noticed. Is that fair?
As long as it's not overdone.
I would agree with that.
I've seen some of late where some of the words that were highlighted are I guess what I would say would be soft skills. If you're highlighting hard skills, I would probably agree. Soft skills like strong communication skills, strong organizational skills, things that almost anybody could say on their resume, I would definitely not highlight. But if you're talking about, like I used SEO, search engine optimization, or some specific marketing, like mixed market modeling for data science folks or something like that. That helps, because it does help, as much as we're reading, it does help have that that word or that phrase pop out. And I should say too, if you're using acronyms, make sure that you at some point spell that acronym out, like search engine optimization, parentheses, SEO, because the system sometimes will look for one or the other or both.
Great point. How would you recommend dealing with large employment gap?
Well, first of all, I would say, gosh, there's been a lot of that, a lot more of that, certainly than years and years ago, because there's been so many changes with companies. So I don't think that most of the recruiters that I talk to are surprised necessarily that people have a gap. In terms of how I go about it in the interview, I will typically ask people, so let me back up. Just because there's a gap doesn't, excuse me, doesn't mean that I wouldn't review the resume and go, oh, well, there's been a, looks like a gap, but they do have the qualifications, so I'm going to talk to them. But I do want to find out, excuse me, what the individual has been doing during that time frame. Have they been adding certifications? Have they been taking classes? Have they been doing Crossroads? Was it, you don't have to go into detail. We're not looking for, you know, a lot of people will share, well, I had an elderly parent I needed to take care of, so I did that. Or I've had a number of interviews and I've grown through those interviews. I probably didn't do the best job to begin with. I've honed my resume a little bit better. I'm more focused in terms of the type of role that I want, and it has just taken some time. That's fine. It's just, we just need to know what it looks like. And that from a resume perspective, you know, I don't know, Harry, you could talk about it too, but that's a lot of times why I tell people, you don't need to worry about putting like October 2022 on your resume. If it says 2022, to me, that's fine. If it says 2023 without a date, that's fine. We'll talk about that, or you'll add it in the application. So
Agreed.
Does that, Harry, have any thoughts on that?
I totally agree. But realizing also, again, when you're just sending in your resume, all they know is the data that you have on the resume. And so, you know, if they have, you know, 5 people that are currently working in a job that is exactly like what they're trying to hire for, and then they have somebody that, you know, is currently in a gap or has a big previous gap before, it's less likely you're going to get a call. Again, it doesn't mean you can't pursue that job, but it's less likely that just sending in the resume through the application is going to do it for you. You have to find additional ways to pursue that position as well.
And I would say too, because I certainly have interviewed people that have been out, even I just did the other day, somebody was out since last May. And they had great skills prior to that. So we had a conversation. And what I would highly encourage is that, like I said earlier in mock interview, plan on being asked, so tell me about what's taken place since May 2022. Simple as that. Like, okay, have your story, minute and a half, 2 minutes tops, about what you've done, make it as natural as possible, and don't change it. It doesn't have to change. It should just be like, oh, I'm probably going to get asked this, so I'm going to prepare this answer. It has to be fairly forthcoming, but just be prepared.
Here's a great question from John. It says, will you look at candidates that applied for other roles automatically or just the new applicants? I think sometimes people assume that, well, I applied to another position at Best Buy, so they're going to consider me for everything that comes up that's appropriate. True or false?
Oh, false. If I read that right.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. We can see, and again, in our dashboard, as most scenarios with an ATS would allow, that this individual has applied to another role or roles. So I could click on the profile and I can see what else they've applied to. That just gets, sometimes it just gives me a sense that, oh, they're applying for similar roles. And I wonder if my counterpart over there is going to be talking to him. So I can look in the system and I can see that, oh, they applied to the role that Alex is working on, and he actually has communicated with them. So I'll check with Alex first. But if I see a really strong applicant who's applied to a role in data science, as a data scientist, for instance, I will typically send if I already have somebody for that role, I'll typically send that strong candidate to the hiring leadership and say, just so you know, here's another person we might want to consider if you have a role coming up anytime soon. Just want to let you know. Or as we do, especially in the technical space, we will save those profiles, save those resumes. And in some cases, we'll talk to the individual knowing that this position that they'd applied to is going to get filled with someone else, but we want to let them know that we're interested, find out what they're interested in and kind of what their time frame is. So that happens less frequently for sure, but yeah, just because somebody applies doesn't mean I'm going to route them all over every place else, if that was the question.
Right. No, that typically doesn't happen. You want to make sure you apply. The flip side of that is a caution of not to apply to too many positions at one company, right? And maybe you can address that a little bit.
Yeah, I can't remember the record numbers, but I've seen some, definitely more than 50. and there's some that have been a lot higher than that. And our first thought is like, I'm not sure how this person can be actually qualified for that many positions. Nor does that tell me that they really know what they want to do or do well, because there's just so many positions that they've applied to. And it tends to kind of reduce your, if you will, your impact and the interest overall, I would say, if you just see just people just boom, 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 boom. And sometimes they're positions that are much higher than they should have applied to, and they get declined regularly because they aren't qualified. So you're just like, well, what? Are they just clicking buttons? Or that's kind of how recruiters look at that if you over apply.
Worst case I'm familiar with is a woman that applied to United Health Group over the course of 3 years to 846 positions. She did not get hired. A little
right.
Obsessive compulsive obsessive there.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yep. Yes, I would. Yeah.
We're running out of time here, but let me see if we can catch one or two more of these. What is the current state of companies requesting references and actually pause or follow up with contacts to references?
What was the last part of that, Harry?
Or how many companies these days actually follow up on references?
Oh, well, as a quick example, Best Buy doesn't check references. So we don't ask for them and we don't check them. And a lot of people look at me like, really? And it's like, well, if you think about references, for as long as they've been out there, they're almost always positive. So it's really hard to get an accurate read from a reference unless you're really good at asking questions to that person who's a reference, and they're able to even say something, because now there's a lot of laws and even specific to a company. It's like, nope, we can say date, position, and title. That's it. So that's literally, you could try and throw all kinds of questions at the reference, and they'll just say, I'm sorry, Michael, I can't. So for the most part, we don't. And again, that's with Best Buy. I think smaller companies tend to do some of that a little bit more. And they'll ask if they want references, they'll ask, but I would say in general, I haven't seen much of that going on of late.
If they're asking for references, I would assume that they're checking them, but you're right. Yeah. More companies are not checking them these days, or not asking for them.
One thing that is happening more, and this is true for years past, is especially with the advent and the strength of LinkedIn and the connections on LinkedIn. I would say many times I'll have a manager say, oh, I know a leader at this company in this space where this person worked. I'm just going to shoot them a note in LinkedIn and say, hey, what do you think of so-and-so? So they're doing
backdoor references,
backdoor reference checks a lot.
Yeah.
So just be aware of that. So
Yep. And you'll never know if that had happened, and you'll never know if that influenced a decision on you or not. So just,
Right.
Don't burn bridges and be aware of those possibilities. Michael, thanks so much. It was incredibly informative. You and I have talked about this before, but recruiters tend to agree on so many of these things. And I hear you talk about many of these topics, and I think, yeah, that's exactly the way I would have answered as well. And I mean, obviously it makes me feel good, but at the same time, I know that that's been true with recruiters across the board, because they see the same things. They're looking at resumes all day. They're talking to people, doing interviews, and they see the same things and come to the same conclusions. And so I really appreciate your perspective.
Yeah, well, and hopefully, as people often do, they look on LinkedIn, and a lot of the things that are listed even or commented on in LinkedIn, even about an ATS or an application, are typically pretty negative. And I guess my recommendation with those posts is just move away, because they're typically asked in a fairly uninformed manner. And as you can see, there's a lot of stuff to cover just an ATS and what goes on behind, and most people don't know that. And why would they? They wouldn't, you shouldn't have to know that. So
Yep.
Just a thought. But thanks for having me. Very much enjoyed it.
Much appreciated. Let me run through a few slides here. Let me get this up on the screen about what else we offer through Crossroads. And we certainly want you guys to take advantage of that, because there is so much. It's all free, and we want you to be able to get all the help you can for your job search. And so if this is your first time joining us on a webinar, you will be receiving a free gift. It's a devotional called How Long, Oh Lord, How Long, written by Dale Cronkamp. He's been on our webinars before. He wrote this as a result of his own job search, but has some great insight in there that can be incredibly encouraging. It's got an index in the back that kind of, you can look up, what am I really facing right now in my job search, and find an appropriate devotional for that. And so that'll be on its way in the mail here in the next few days to you. And we're just glad to be able to share it, and hope it's an encouragement for you. Everything Crossroads locally is on our website, mncrossroads.com. You can find all the different events and things we offer, as well as schedules and how to sign up and take advantage of them all. We also have a job board on there that we have a number of companies that know about Crossroads, know that there's great people that participate and are looking for great people for their companies. And so check that out. When you apply or when you talk to somebody there, you can mention that you found out about it through Crossroads, and there's a wide variety of jobs that come up. Obviously, we're not as big as Indeed.com or anything like that, but they are more targeted, and you have often they'll put in their contact information so you can reach out and talk to somebody. So take advantage of that, check that regularly, and hopefully that'll provide some help for you as well. There's additional resources on the website as well. Peruse the information that's there and take advantage of as much as you can. On a weekly basis, we have a number of ways you can get plugged in. Most importantly, I think our Networking with Grace group that meets online every Thursday morning at 9 o'clock. So following this, you do need to pre-register online, but it's a way to meet with a number of other people. We have Wes Tang and Wes Roper that lead that. We call them Wes 1 and Wes 2, and they do a tremendous job of making sure that everybody feels welcome, everybody gets help, that walks out with information each week. And it's a great way to share contacts and get information about companies you're interested in, and all kinds of different ways to get help in your job search. There's hope and encouragement in there as well. We have one-on-one coaching available. You can find the information online and sign up on the form there. And one of our volunteers will reach out to you and set up a time to meet with you, whether by Zoom meeting or a phone call. And you can have them look at your resume and get some feedback, or if you want to prepare for an interview, or if you want to talk through how to network better, or anything that's on your mind. Sometimes it's just about talking through your situation with somebody that gets it and can offer some insight and advice. So take advantage of that as often as you like. You can sign up on the forum online, and like I said, somebody will reach out to you within a day or so. We have a team of people that love to pray for you, and I'm just so grateful for them. And we have a prayer request page on our website that you can put in a prayer request and they'll pray for you specifically. And if you feel like, I'm just really struggling through this emotionally and spiritually, and you'd really like to have some more, a little more ongoing support and insight from somebody, we have a group that provides what we call soul care, and you can sign up for that online as well. Somebody will follow up with you to talk about what that looks like and what if to see if that makes sense for you, and that's all free. And so take advantage of that as well. The meat and potatoes are where you can get the most in-depth and ongoing help for your job searches through our online classes. We have a small group class. We have a new one that starts every month. We just had one that started on Monday. The information is still up on the website. You can still join that to join them for the second week this coming Monday. But we cover every aspect of a successful job search, starting with attitude and getting in the right frame of mind, and dealing with any bitterness or anger or anything, but really being able to present yourself as positively as possible by getting in the right frame of mind for your job search. We do some assessments so you can better identify and talk about those things that you're good at and who you are as an individual and what makes you unique. We talk a lot about networking and targeting companies. We dive into resumes and interviewing skills. We talk about negotiating and selecting the right job, and there's so much more. And while the content is really strong and I think incredibly effective to do an effective job search and gives you confidence to know you're doing the right things, I think equally important is that weekly check-in with others that are in the same boat and get some light accountability about what you're doing from week to week, providing encouragement, moral support through this process. And throughout the 8 weeks, we talk about also what's God's perspective of your career and your job search and your life. I think that is such a key component to all of this. So as I mentioned, new classes beginning monthly. You can still jump in on this April class, and then I'll be starting a class in May as well. So you can see the information and sign up online. And I really can't emphasize enough how much I think that it's important to get plugged into one of these. It can make such a huge difference for your job search. Join our LinkedIn group. You can find the information on the website, or just go to LinkedIn and in the search box, put MN Crossroads Career Network. You'll find us. And on that, in that group site, there's recruiters that post jobs. There's a lot of great discussion about different job search topics. We post our upcoming events on there. And I think most importantly, we've got well over 2,000 people that have been through Crossroads, landed in new jobs, that are in there and are willing to be contacts at those companies that they're working at now. And so if you're looking for networking contacts at companies that you're targeting, look through our members on the LinkedIn group and see if you can find somebody that might be a resource for you to reach out to. And it's a great way to give back after you've landed. Stay in the group and allow other people to reach out to you from time to time to be able to help in their quest as well. And so take advantage of that. I really encourage you to, as I think on every slide, I say, I really encourage you to take advantage of this, but it's true. There's a lot of great resources. Our YouTube channel, if you, a couple people have asked about that, and this webinar will be posted on there before the end of the day today, and all of our previous webinars are on there as well. If you just put MN Crossroads Career Network in the search box on YouTube, you'll find us, and you can review any of our previous webinars and those topics. And you can, if we're too slow for you, you can watch them at 1.5 or double time, so that it goes by quicker. But you can jump around and rewind and see things that you missed or want to see in greater detail. So check out our YouTube channel, and like I say, this webinar will be on there before the end of the day today as well. As an additional resource, overall, Thrivent has just been a great partner with us. They provided financial help for us to do a lot of the things that we do through Crossroads, and they provide 3 webinars a month. Also, it's posted on our website, but just financial considerations during your job transition. They talk about, how to budget more effectively. They talk about the market in terms of, how to think about your 401k and other things that may be relevant during a job transition. These are not sales presentations in any way. They're really informative, helpful for you to be able to get to figure things out as you may be between paychecks here. So check it out, sign up, and you can take advantage of those as often as you like. I just want to acknowledge that all the things we offer through Crossroads doesn't happen because of a couple of people. There's actually, we're around 45 people that volunteer in one way or another. They bring their time and their expertise and just a desire to help others. And nobody's getting paid for anything. Everybody's a volunteer and just offers their time and expertise to get all this done. So as you talk to others, as you take advantage of coaching or classes, be sure to thank them. I'm just grateful for every one of them. And if you don't have a church home, when we meet in person, which we're not doing obviously right now, but hope to again here at some time before too long, we meet at 3 different churches around the Twin Cities area: at Woodbury Lutheran, North Heights Church in Arden Hills, and Grace Church in Eden Prairie. And I encourage you to get a church home. Find a place that you can get some weekly help and hope and encouragement, and build a community and certainly get insight into your faith. I encourage you can watch any of them online, but in person is always better. And so you can take advantage of those either way. And with that, we're done for this morning. I'm glad you joined us. I hope it was worthwhile. And let me unshare my screen here. But thanks for joining us and hope to see you again. Our next webinar is the first Monday. I believe it's May 6th. I'm not sure the date exactly, but the first Thursday, excuse me, of the month. And we have somebody talking about branding. It's going to be a great help and resource for you there too. So have a great day. Have a great week. Hope to see you again soon. Take care.